everybody. I would like to welcome you to our little panel here tonight. I'm Stefan Weichert from Hamburg Media School and co-founder of the non-profit think tank VOCER, who is hosting this panel tonight. So thanks for coming, y'all. I would like to start with a little game here. Who of you did not vote for Donald Trump? By citizenship or by heart? Okay, I don't see every hand here. What's wrong? Who expected Trump to be president, honestly? Really? Okay, you're good. Who had the feeling during the election that he or she, as a journalist, had something to do against Trump's ambitions getting president? Who had this feeling, his stomach feeling, bad stomach feeling? Okay, one honest person here at least. So who has this feeling now to do something against Trump? Okay, not so many, but I think that's the spirit. So to complete the game I want to ask one last question. Who thinks that Donald Trump is something good that is happening to journalism right now? In the end, okay, wow, good. So when I visited New York last October, together with my colleague from VOCER Live Crump here, I had visited and studied a lot of newsrooms during that time, and we realized that it was very easy to get into a conversation with journalists when we start to talk about Trump during this time, and it was the major phase of the election, as you might know, in October. But none of our interview partners was seriously expecting that Donald Trump could win, even though the FBI was investigating Hillary Clinton. So everybody, first and foremost, my dearest friend Jeff Jarvis here, was then very, very, very disappointed as soon as he heard of the latest polls during election night. Do you remember the tweet you were posting at 4 or 5 a.m. in the morning on November 9th?
God hates us?
No. Fucking America. And that, I believe, was the feeling almost every journalist had in the country at this night, and I have to confess, not only in America. So since Trump had won his presidency, a lot of questions were risen, such as how could this have happened? What have we done wrong? What have we overseen in covering and explaining the election? And that's when we came up with the idea of post-Trump journalism discourse or conversation. And also the title of this panel is, of course, very provocative, but not only to fill up this room today. We'd rather like to think about Trump as a wake-up call for journalism, a worst-case scenario that could, in its badness, overall be useful for us to rethink journalism, to rethink how journalism is functioning, how news are distributed, how the profession is defined and maybe financed, and last not least, how people, quote Trump, in the fake news business could regain the trust of the people that seems to be gotten off track during the last couple of years. So what about this title, netzwende, which means somehow in a way like something like net transition? It could be a motto or just a hashtag for today. It could also be a Slack group to organize this discourse with you. It could be a movement, depending on you people, even an alliance among equal partners, of whom are very many here today. But definitely it will be an award giving for the first time together with the Schwingenstein Foundation and VOCER, first time in November in Hamburg at VOCER Innovation Day. So it will be an award for sustainability in journalism. So maybe Trump is the best that could ever have happened to journalism, because he makes this transition necessary. Considering this potential, VOCER takes the opportunity of hosting this panel here tonight about the fallout of the US election, about fake news, hate speech, about the atomization of the public, media populism, maybe social bots, and some perspectives of organic journalism. So each speaker, to explain the format, has 5 minutes to enlighten you, the attendees, about his or her idea of the netzwende, the net transition, a fundamental change of the relevance, the production, the distribution, and the funding of journalistic content. So the goal of this session overall is to bring together forward thinkers like these 6 fine brains here on the panel in order to discuss creative ideas and stimuli how we can get journalism more sustainable in a sense of a driven aim of plurality, diversity, and, well, let us surprise ourselves. So again, each speaker has 5 minutes, and for his little wake-up call, and if the time is overdue, my colleague René here will make an awkward sound to remind the people that they are over the 5 minutes. So we're going to start with Frederick. Frederick is not only a colleague of mine from VOCER, he's also editor-in-chief of PICT, a curation platform, a German one, which just started an English version. With his statement, like maybe Trump is our Chernobyl or our Fukushima for journalism, he encouraged us to start the journalistic debate about netzwende. So he's a kind of initiator, originator. Today he will focus on the maybe wrong KPIs and their consequences, as well as inevitable dependencies and the question, what's the lesser evil? So you are welcome to give Frederick a huge applause.
I'm not sure this. Oh, it is on. Yeah, let me start with a confession. I am in a sort of hate-love relationship with the International Journalism Festival. I love Perugia, who doesn't? I love meeting all the new friends. I love going to the panels. But I hate being reminded every year that we're not really making huge progress. In fact, I have the feeling every year we're in a little bit worse situation than the year before. And I'm not so sure if actually looking for, quite like asking journalists to lead a way out of this is really the right group of people to ask. So lately I was looking beyond journalism for some inspiration, and I didn't have to look that far. Actually, I just had to look at my wife. She's an environmentalist, and I mean, environmentalism is also not the merriest industry at the moment. There are a lot of bad news there as well, but there's great hope and great progress. So this very moment, there is a radical transformation of the energy grid. The so-called smart grid is very much like the early version of the internet. It's a peer-to-peer platform. It allows access to everyone, small producers, a lot of renewables, and it's decentralized. That's a very radical transition going on right now. And how does that relate to the situation we are in right now? It's quite the exact opposite situation we are in right now, right? Like, we are experiencing how more and more power is concentrated in a few hands, namely Facebook and Google. But don't worry, I'm not going to start with a whole rant about the platforms and dependencies and all this stuff. I want to go back to the environmental movement, because I think there are some lessons to be learned for us journalists. And the first lesson, I think, is that we need a sustainability movement in journalism. Like, one of the first and most important victories of the environmental movement was that they forced us to make a distinction between dirty energy, like fossil fuels, and clean energy, renewables. And for some reason, and I really wonder why that is, we don't really have that kind of discussion and this distinction when we talk about journalism. It's all kind of like a big mess. We never really know what we talk about when we talk about journalism. There is no brand like organic journalism, and organic journalism doesn't sound that sexy, but I think it would be great if we could agree on a brand like that. If we agree that there definitely is a distinction between the sort of industrial brand of journalism that is produced for reach, and the reach will be optimized, and that's not a bad thing, but I think it sets the wrong incentives. And then there is another brand of journalism that is really more there for the public good, that is something that we associate with the fourth estate, and that is not faring really well at the moment. That it's still out there for sure. Maybe there's even more out there than ever, but it's increasingly drowned in a flood of sensationalist headlines that are optimized for social. I think the best example, of course, are Brexit and Trump. And they clearly showed us what happens if we allow that responsible reporting is dwarfed by fake news and sensationalist headlines. We see and we witnessed, we did that, the complete meltdown of the public sphere. So that's why I think we can actually compare Donald Trump with the Chernobyl of journalism. So that's the one lesson. The next lesson is that there is no market yet. Renewables, when they entered the market, there was no way they could compete with the established sources of energy. So there had to be subsidies, and subsidies sound really unsexy, and I know it is a very, very difficult topic, but I think we have to allow for some sort of subsidy. We have to allow for some sort of public involvement, because we clearly see that the market is not really, is not fixing it. We looked at it for over 10 years now, and it's not happening. It's not happening for quality journalism, with very, very few exemptions. And then there's the last lesson, and that is that I think we should be encouraged by the environmental movement to think big again, to be more bold. The energy transition, in German Energiewende, is quite a big success story. But in the beginning, everyone considered it was a bonkers idea. It was just a bit grandiose to think that actually renewables could sometime replace fossil fuels. But Chernobyl opened a window of opportunity, and that's what I mean when I say Trump is the Chernobyl of journalism. I think he opened an opportunity to allow for more bold ideas, and now is really a unique situation where we can reconfigure our relation to the platform, where we can really draft a bold and a courageous future of the journalism that we have to. Before Trump, that wasn't really happening, and now it's also not happening, but the opportunity is there. So I really hope for bold ideas, because now it's the time for a netzwende. Now, if not now, then when? Thanks.
Thank you, Frederick. Great. Even better than Sean Spicer couldn't make it because he traveled to Sweden by mistake. Couldn't attend to the festival. So our next speaker is Guya Baji. According to her Twitter handle, she's just somewhere in the world, but today she's the one with the biggest home advantage in our round because she's Italian. She's a co-founder of the investigative reporting project Italy, IRPI. I'm learning it. Today she will give us some views that go far beyond our personal filter bubble.
Hello, everybody. Okay, I would like to start saying that I don't have any recipe to tackle fake news, but I'm here to share some approaches that I think can actually work to improve the digital journalism environment. When I co-founded IRPI back in 2012, we really decided to focus and to put a lot of highlight the fact that we really wanted to collaborate and partner with other journalists and media organizations, and so this was a key element and aspect for us, to really fostering this type of collaboration with others. And I think this is something that Trump actually has brought up in journalism, because his kind of unpredicted victory has somehow highlighted that there is a kind of disconnection probably between media, especially the big media corporations that they have headquarters in global cities, and instead people living in the rest of the country, and they probably, there was a kind of misinterpretation of what was the public opinion and the real issues there. And so I think that actually if a media organization will also really like kind of open up and team up with maybe freelancers or other no-profits or journalists, more spread across the country, that would be really good for journalism to get more in touch with the actual feeling that there is among people. And also another thing that is in the same direction, like this attempt to recreate a sort of connection with the public and to regain trust. I think also maybe we are too much online in the online world, and sometimes also to engage people in the content of our journalism and our products. It would be good maybe to go more in the middle, like of the people, maybe in public places, like cultural or educational institutions, and there, making journalism also a kind of a personal experience. And in this way, maybe like managing to get more in touch with the people that they then have something to take away. The third point that I would like to point out is like something more we are kind of trying to focus now at RPI, is like creating tools that will help journalists to somehow avoid like wasting their times, like all doing the same, like going through the same process to get access to documents or to certain information. And so in this way, I know now this kind of tool, creating tool is something that is really like springing up, and there are so many tools, and some of them, they really kind of also make similar things. But as reporters, we somehow really encounter the need of certain tools, that are not there. And so in this sense, we are trying to create some specific ones to fill this gap. Like, for instance, now with the DNA fund, we got the opportunity to create this mafia file that would be like so far just a prototype, but we imagine it like an archive for documents related to organized crime court cases. There will be different level of access, and basically it will be like a tool available for journalists to really report accurately on that subject. Okay, so the whole thing is to say that I think anyway, to really tackle fake news, I think it's something that is really up to all of us, like taking it like as a kind of mission for our work.
Thank you, Julia Baji. I'm sure we're going to find some recipes in that, and I have to show you something. No notes, all free spoken. Great, thank you so much. So the next speaker is probably the one you came for here tonight. He's the $14 million man, the king of election land. And when it comes to Donald Trump, Jeff Jarvis can't be far. So the author of What Would Google Do and professor at the Town Knight Center for Entrepreneurial Journalism at the City University of New York has one favorite word that pranks on his Twitter bio and his cap: resist. So thanks for coming to us, Jeff. Thanks for joining us.
Let me make clear first that no, I was merely the a landlord for election land. The monarch of election land is Claire Wardle.
Thank you, Jeff Jarvis.
And of much more. No, there's nothing good about the election of Donald Trump in my view. Though I tell my entrepreneurial students that when you see a problem, a journalist finds the problem and complains about it and goes to the bar. The engineer finds the problem and tries to find a solution, and the entrepreneur finds the problem and tries to find an opportunity. So I guess we should look for the opportunity even in this hell, or at least the lesson. And to me, the key lesson of this election is that we are shit bad listeners to the public. And mind you, this format is also a metaphor for that, because here I am talking to you and I'm listening to you and you all know more than I do. And that's the way we're structured here. And I don't mean that it's about predicting the election of Donald Trump. Predictions don't mean crap. As Jay Rosen says, it's all about trying to make us look savvy. It does nothing to inform the electorate. It does nothing, predictions do nothing to make people smarter about what they do. So, what do I mean when I say we don't listen? Let me be very, very, very clear first. There are many, many communities in the United States and other nations, but I'll start with my own nation, that are not listened to, not reflected, not thus served by media. African Americans, Latino Americans, LGBTQ Americans, disabled Americans, women, and the list goes on and on and on. But none of those groups as a whole elected Donald Trump. There's a half of America that resents and hates big media, as we're called, my parents among them. And that I think in the 70s, when we in big media reached our journalistic zenith of defeating Richard Nixon, we also destroyed a Republican president. And to my mind now, that's the beginning of the fall in trust from at least half of America in what we know as big media. And as a result, they didn't trust us, they didn't listen to us, we didn't reflect their worldview, that's why they didn't trust us, and the result of that in the end was we could not inform their worldview. Our job as journalists in the end is to inform the public conversation, or as James Carey, the legendary Columbia professor, says to the contrary, it is to be informed by the public conversation, and then in turn to inform it. Well, the only way we can do that is if we listen and listen well. And we haven't had the tools in the past to listen well. We send reporters out with notebooks, they fill in blanks in their stories where the quotes ought to go. They've already pitched the story, they know what the story is. Let's be honest, that's the way we operate. Rather than going out, the new social journalism program we started at CUNY, led by my genius colleague Carrie Brown, is about listening to communities first, understanding their needs, understanding their goals, and then and only then bringing them journalism. So I think that one opportunity here is to examine ourselves and examine how we have not listened to, we do not reflect, we thus do not serve, we thus cannot inform the worldviews of large swaths of the populations of our countries, and we have to reform that. So that's point one about listening. Point two about listening is that I think that we were very bad at spotting the manipulation that occurred, and that's us in media, it's also the platforms. Google and Facebook fancy themselves, like as we did, as mirrors on society. Don't blame us, we're just reflecting what society is. But of course, society warps itself to manipulate those mirrors. And I don't think we've done nearly good enough job of recognizing where the alt-right sprung from, how it manipulated the conversation, what occurred around that. And yes, some of these are technological tools of bots and fake accounts. And yes, a lot of it is us in media falling for the trap and giving undue influence to manipulation. But we have to do a better job of listening to the entire conversation and understanding where the manipulation comes from. Third and last point. We in journalism are reductive. We reduce everything to a simple narrative of 800 words. That's what we do. That's what our specialty was. Well, now we live in a world where there are tools that can better reflect more complex realities. And I think it's incumbent upon us, as we listen for that manipulation, to also listen for what the public is saying and thinking and needing and wanting to know and getting confused and being wrong about. We have much better and more complex tools about how to do that. I'm just an old rewrite guy. I don't have the tools that Claire has in research. And I'm going to call upon Claire, believe me, in asking for advice about how we use the tools in other disciplines to understand how better to listen to the public. In social journalism, Carrie Brown brings in anthropologists. We need to bring in psychologists. We need to bring in marketers. We need to bring in people who understand this better than we do in journalism because we've done too much of thinking that our life is about making narratives and stories and being storytellers. And yes, Donald Trump is one fuck of a story, but telling that story the way we did didn't help the world.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. Great. So I have told you before, but questions we're going to pose after all 6 speakers spoke. So the next one is Lena. She seems to be everywhere where the action is. She's a real digital journalism rock star, and with her motto, just do it, she could have also worked for Nike. Fortunately, she used her passion to found the Media Lab Bavaria, an incubator for new ideas in digital journalism. Besides, she founded the Slack community, www Digital Journalism Rocks, with now over 1,000 members. I heard you are spending free drinks tomorrow night at some bar here in Perugia, so say hi to Lena. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much. I think for the free drinks, I still need a sponsor, so if somebody in here feels to do so, feel free to come to me afterwards. Yeah. I think as I'm working in the media startup scene, I used to be a journalist and I'm now working in the media startup scene and supporting media startups. I think I'm heading in kind of a partly direction as Jeff does. I think when it comes to Trump, Trump did not cause anything, but I think he just made visible what went wrong over the last 30 years or so. Since half a year, we are talking about trust. We journalists think we have a trust problem. But I would say it's not a problem of trust. It's a problem of our own arrogance. We are so arrogant as journalists, arrogant as hell. And I can say that because I worked as a journalist, I went to all these newsrooms. We are laughing about letters from our readers. I don't know what happened. We are so arrogant. We are not arrogant towards our readers, but towards new players in the market as well. And that's a problem. So where does this arrogance come from? Let's think of a reporter like 10 years ago in a renowned newspaper. In the morning, you go into your huge newsroom with a lot of people in there, and maybe you go through the entrance hall which is made out of marble or something like this. And in the conference, you debate with your editor-in-chief about the topics of the day. Of course, you know what is important because you are a journalist. Of course you know. You know what every reader out there should know, what he should read. You decide. And these are the people who also think that putting up a PDF as an e-paper is enough to do online. So just let me ask you this question. In which moment of the day do these people really think about their reader? Maybe when they're going out on their marble staircase or when they have put up their PDF newspaper out there. Media has grown over the last years to huge companies. There was no way that media can't be there. There was the readers needed newspapers, the advertising industry needed newspapers, but something changed. And just remember also 10 years ago how we smiled and laughed at these bloggers out there. Today, they're not only bloggers, but media startups, real startups. And for the last 2 years, I worked with those teams. And those teams are enthusiastic as hell. They don't know where they get money from next month, but they have to work today, and they know that there certainly is no money for them if they don't work their ass off today. And they have to build an audience from scratch. There's no big brand behind them who can help them with this. They have to build it from scratch. And how do they do it? They talk to their readers. They talk to their audience. Like Jeff said, they find a problem. And I learned that one from the startup scene. They find a problem and first find a problem and then build a solution on that. And journalists always say, okay, I ever wanted to do this thing, I just do it and then put it out there and hope somebody reads it. And startups have to build products people love because they know when they don't build a product people love, they don't have an audience and they don't have money. So they don't have anything to eat next month. It's as simple as this. And they just can't afford being arrogant. So, dear legacy media journalists, I think that is your real problem right now. There are teams out there that are enthusiastic about what they do, they want to earn money, and they know the audience far better than you will ever do. And in the last 2 years, or in the last 3 years or so, it went into 2 directions. One of them are the cool media startups like Vox.com or Mashable or all of them. And the other ones are digital-only outlets like Breitbart. We don't think Breitbart is cool, but they totally understand their audience. They have a huge audience out there, and they know how to get into that niche. And what Trump did, first of all, he revealed our arrogance and how arrogant we were towards our readers. But he also revealed how powerful digital-only outlets already are. And he didn't reveal that to the readers and the users out there. They already knew, because they get that we don't give a shit, about all of them for the last 10 years or so. He revealed that to us. And we still laugh about these digital-only news outlets. We laugh about BuzzFeed and Breitbart. But when we do so, we laugh about all thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who we don't reach anymore. So I would beg you, all those legacy media journalists, to overcome your arrogance and start learning how to think as a startup, how to build products people love, and how to get your audience back. Because when you don't do that, in 5 years, there will be no audience for you to reach, because they're all out there on the digital-only outlets. Thank you.
Thank you, Lena. Just in time. A very, very moving rant, I would say, if that isn't a contradiction, a moving rant. So, next one is Claire Wardle. She's interested in finding solutions to the misinformation mess we find ourselves in. As a director of research and strategy at First Draft News, she's going to argue that Trump isn't good for journalism. So we are very pleased that Claire had time for us tonight, because with 5 panels that she is on, or 6 she is on, and another 3 panels she is managing, she definitely won the Perugia Panel Award. Give it up for Claire. Thank you.
Okay, so it's true that this is my 3rd panel today. I'm feeling feisty. I've already had an Aperol Spritz. And so when the invitation came to be on this panel, I said, I can't be on this panel because I don't think Trump is good for journalism. And to be fair, the answer was, just have a rant anyway. I was like, okay, let's have a rant. Firstly, look at all of you in the room. Really? We're in Italy. Germans have organized a panel talking about the orange-haired one. What are we doing? There are a million stories we're not covering because we're obsessed with this reality TV star. I was just in Australia. I was on a TV program for an hour, and it was Q&A, questions from the audience. Every single question was about Trump. Really? 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 No. There are too many other questions and stories that we're not covering. ProPublica, let's leave it to them. They are doing the most incredible job of holding Trump to account. Somebody needs to. But we shouldn't be all here talking about him. We just shouldn't be. That's why we need to drink. But my first thing is this. It's a global obsession that he has caused, and it's a huge, huge problem. And you're not going to be surprised. And my second point is that his use of the term fake news, and you know that I do not use that term, and when I do, I like to put money in a tip jar, is that he's using that term, and he has weaponized that term. Australian politicians now use that term. Politicians in Korea use that term. Because he used that term, he has weaponized it. We laugh at it. It is dangerous. It is dangerous because any other authoritarian leader does what he does. We have a problem with it. We laugh because he does it. We need to stop using that term, and we need to recognize that his use of that term is meaning that we are not looking at the systematic disinformation campaigns from Russia and China, stuff that people have been worrying about all around the world for years. Just because Trump won the election, we're suddenly looking at it. So I'll take the extra money. I'll take the extra money that's coming because Trump won, but there is a much bigger issue here around the systematic disinformation, the pollution of our information ecosystem, and we need to stop just following him, because there's a reason he's calling out mainstream media as fake news, and it's incredibly, incredibly dangerous, and I worry that we're not thinking about it strategically enough. Thirdly, Jeff, I love you, but this is being live streamed, this panel. This is being live streamed. Think about everybody that voted for Trump who believe that their values have not been represented by the mainstream media. And we are on a panel making jokes about Trump for people who really believe that they weren't having their values represented. And we make jokes about it and we say, as journalists, we don't like Trump in the White House. Whatever, whoever the, there's a bigger investigation occurring right now about whether anything did impact the way that he was elected. But he was elected. And I come from the UK where we have the BBC and we have impartiality, which is different to objectivity. But we need to be very careful about the way we talk about Trump if we don't think that it's dangerous and we are losing even more trust with our audience if we don't recognize that many, many, many people say, I've not had my values represented by the mainstream media. So I'm going to keep it short, but I'm angry. And this is a rant. And we have to recognize that just having laughy, jokey panels about Trump, he is a serious, serious concern. He is really, really doing damage to our industry. And we need to think a bit more critically about it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Woo!
Straight to the point. Now it's hard for our last speaker. It's Adam Thomas. He's director of the European Journalism Center, EJC. And he has a very different motto. Don't panic. Judging from his Instagram feed, there's no reason to panic at all because he's just posting pictures from Paris, Sydney, New York, and Kenya, just to name a few. Today here in Perugia, he's going to talk about philanthropy in journalism. So give Adam a panic applause, please.
Wow, Claire, thank you. I'm not quite sure how I follow that. Start off with, this table is like a wedding, but like a very weird political wedding, where everyone is very angry. So is Trump the best thing that happened to journalism? I think I might be the only one here saying yes in a kind of an affirmative, and Pierre Omidyar just made my job and my argument a bit easier. He just dropped like $100 million to support journalism and to fight hate speech, and that happened this week. You'll have all have seen the news. I believe we're on the cusp of a new era of philanthropic funding. Is it a coincidence that this is happening after Trump? Well, you've got to look at that from two perspectives. One is where journalism finds itself right now. The other one is the societal kind of position that we also find ourselves in right now. So look, the supposed demise of journalism is well documented. You've all been at panels about this kind of stuff. We've got no longer a monopoly on content distribution. We face competitors everywhere. The cost of distribution is essentially zero. Anyone with a Medium account is essentially your competitor. We don't have the best data on audiences. I think we maybe never did, but we sure as hell definitely don't now. Other organizations are definitely better at communicating to our audiences than we are in the places that they want, in the ways that they want. Think about messaging, thinking about video. Those are the ways people communicate right now. And you put this against a backdrop of public trust in media is at an all-time low. You've also got increased censorship. So Freedom House will put global press freedom at the lowest point it's been for 12 years, increased violence against journalists all over the world. That's journalism. That's the challenges that journalism faces. On the other side of things, you've got to look at then the societal things that we're talking about, these tectonic shifts, these big changes in the social fabric where we're suddenly realizing other people think differently than we do, and we're finding it hard to reconcile these two viewpoints. So, for me, Trump has basically brought those two things into sharp focus together. The issues with journalism and the issues with society, and that's why potentially he's the best thing that's ever happened to journalism. Because this combination of a need for a new business model plus this moment of political awakening, it might just be the best thing that's ever happened to us. So, how? Well, if we look at problems on how we want to fix it, and I'm going to read you a quote from a fantastic article that I hope a lot of you have read, which is Dana Boyd's "Google and Facebook can't just make fake news disappear." And she said, we need to develop social, technical, economic, and political structures that allow people to understand, appreciate, and bridge different viewpoints. Too much technology in media was architected with the idea of just making information available would do that cultural work. We now know this has not happened. So essentially what she's saying is we're looking for bridge builders, we're looking for information managers. We're looking for something Mark Little in an essay recently called architects of trust, trust architects. So if we look for a job profile of what they might look like, well, you need an ability to manage large amounts of information. You've got to be experts in adding context, checking facts. You've got to be motivated at your core and be prepared to be transparent about the work that you're doing. You've got to have a deeply questioning personality, and you've got to have amazing empathetic storytelling chops, basically. Well, that sounds a lot like a journalist, doesn't it? Well, it's almost journalists are almost that perfect bridge builder. They're almost that perfect architects of trust. But there are a few things that we need to do that need to change, that we need to upskill in, as it were. So behavioral psychology is something that we really need to start understanding if we're going to build these bridges. We need a mastery of data both on the storytelling side, but also on the analysis side. We've got to develop computational thinking skills, the way that you formulate a problem that a computer can solve it, not a human. We also need more distance from political institutions. We need freedom from deep commercial ties. And then we need access to all areas of society, and we need to be willing to advocate for solutions. So the bad news is that journalism and journalists are going to have to learn more new stuff, I'm afraid. That's kind of tough. But the good news is that if journalists work out how to build these bridges, this is exactly the kind of work that philanthropists are prepared to fund. Philanthropists like Wadah and many, many others. There are, at the last count, some 5,000 foundations here just in Europe. And the amount that they spend on the funding of the media it's tiny. It's less than 1% of their budget, most likely. So if journalists can work out how to build these bridges, can work out how to turn themselves into being these architects of trusts, then basically this is exactly the kind of work that they can get paid for. They will find that journalism is restored not only to a vital social function, but also it's going to be sustainably funded. So that's my argument of why Trump is good for journalism.
Thank you so much. A very thoughtful wedding speech, and I have to thank you all for delivering these brilliant speeches. So as we want to make it now as interactive as we can, we would like to open the discussion with you, the public. Yeah, you want to break the ice. Okay, that's cool. Do we have a mic in the room? Is there any mic? Oh, over there. So.
Hi, hello, it's Mariano from Argentina. So obviously we all have been discussing in this lovely Perugia macchiato thing about what's going on with Trump and all that kind of stuff. And one argument that shows up yesterday was this is not the problem of journalism, this is a problem of education of the people. And if I tell you that this is raining right now, you won't believe because you know it's not raining right now. So how far is like we are assuming that the media has the mission to tell the people what is true, so people will decide, and maybe we are not addressing the point that people media has to cover what's going on and tell what's going on the ground, and let the people choose. And maybe there are other organizations that need to take care of this also, which is educational problem. Maybe
okay.
Jeff, do you want to answer?
Jeff, you want to comment on that? Just improvise.
I think it was a good observation on its own. We have is this thing on? Yeah. A lot of the discussion right now is about so-called news literacy and media literacy. And I believe in that. Dan Gilmore is doing a lot of good work on that, and Dan's here somewhere. But I think I want to be careful that we not think that if you read the product we've always put out, you are thus defined as literate and everything's okay. We have a new reality where we have to bring journalism to people where they are and understand that circumstance better and represent them and recognize they're not a mass with one product all the same. So education is critical to it, but it's only one piece of it, I would argue.
More questions? Over there. Yep.
Or arguments.
The first ones are always the hardest. Thanks.
Hi there, my name's John Wilkes. I'm from Content Insights. This is a question for Adam, actually. You just said we need a mastery of data on the storytelling side, but also on the analysis side. And I'm really interested in the analysis side. Where do you think we're going wrong there?
Wow. Where do I start? So, I mean, a lot of it is understanding audiences. Like, I guess we think we have data in newsrooms, and I think there's a lot of fantastic data journalists in this room and at this conference who are fantastic at telling stories using data. Is it something that everyone is entirely literate in? Not as much as we'd like, and I think we need to train that more. But really, it's the business analysis side. It's using data to understand your business better, to understand flows of information, Journalists are information managers, not my phrase, definitely other people's, but journalists are information managers. There is a lot of information flowing around a newsroom in the form of contacts, in the form of stories. None of that's really mapped properly. None of that is being kind of processed. We're not extracting entities. We're not kind of connecting things. And that's just in our own newsroom. We're definitely not tapped into wider data flows around the world, of which there are just so many, right? You can look at weather, you can look at legal information. There is so much stuff around that type of stuff that we're just not using to tap in. Not only, we're good at, I guess, looking at it from an investigative point of view, but when it comes to just picking up signals from that kind of data, there's a huge amount to do there that we need to do in analyzing the world's data. Inside our newsrooms, I mean, I spoke about philanthropy there, and I think what we need to think about is that if we want to attract philanthropic funding, we've got to think like the philanthropists, and we need to think about social impact, which is a different kind of analytic. It's not about page views, it's about changing behaviors, it's about making people do stuff. If we can find a way, and there are many other industries that have found a way of framing their work in that context, if journalists can do that, then it opens us up to a whole world of new type of funding. And let me be clear, this is funding that is very, very different from governmental funding, and it's very, very different from commercial funding, which journalists generally have been quite happy with, but it seem to be very, very nervous of philanthropic funding for some reason, especially here in Europe. I would argue that actually philanthropic funding lets them do their work more, kind of more effectively, and gets it closer to the core of really what journalists want to do as their job. That was a rambling answer, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Oh, there's another question.
I have a short question that connects to this. When you talked about philanthropic funding and the necessity and the goodness of it, the first thing that came to my mind was Soros, George Soros, and he's completely under attack right now in many countries, and he funds a lot of the civil society and independent journalistic work that's going on, for example, in Hungary. And so my question is, you know, if you put all your eggs in that basket, and there's an authoritarian regime that's trying to stop all kinds of philanthropic work going on in that country, you're lost as well. I don't know how sustainable this is as an option.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, like, if you're ever in any kind of industry where uncertainty is a huge factor, then diversification of your revenue sources is very important. I'm not necessarily advocating that you take 100% of your funding from philanthropy, but there are good examples of media organizations who are able to do this. I used to work for an organization that would help actually transition people in news organizations in those types of countries using open source software into profitable business models of their own, so they could wean themselves off the dependency on philanthropic funding. So I think you're right. But I think in Europe, especially all over Europe, there's a huge demand to give money to journalism, and there's a huge need for journalists to just understand that maybe we just have to talk about what we do a little bit differently, reframe that, and that money can come there. So it's a good point, and it is what a lot of philanthropists are very scared of on their side as well, is that they do come under attack and they put their head above the parapet. And that's something that makes especially small foundations, I think, very, very nervous.
Thank you. Over there.
It's going to be super hard to reach you. Thank you. Milica Pesic, Media Diversity Institute, London. Question for Claire, mainly, but others as well. Is real public service media response to including those who are not represented by the media? We know that most of public media services are actually state, but real public service.
Yeah, I mean, you only have to live in America for 2 years to realize how much you miss public service broadcasting. And I think you take it for granted, the idea around fairness, which is, you know, the BBC has struggled sometimes when they've had to put people on, you know, panels that I wouldn't necessarily want, the far right on the British National Party, but their position on fairness is one that actually, once you look at those editorial values and what that means, I think in the long term, it gets us through those times that I see now. I see I've been to too many sessions where I see people just assuming that the anti-Trump position is okay to say publicly. And you certainly, if you work for the BBC, could not say that at all. So, I mean, I worry a little bit about Brexit, where BBC, you know, how the UK got to a situation where a number of people still didn't know what the EU was or what Brexit was the day after the referendum. But I do wish that we could learn a little bit from the values that public broadcasters hold themselves up to. And I certainly see in the US the absence of that. And I'll say quickly, I mean, just access journalism. You know, in the UK, if you're a politician, there's no way you can say no to an interview with the BBC. And the interview you get will be absolutely hard-hitting, the most difficult questions. In the US, for example, ABC is not going to ask the most difficult questions of, you know, the Trump administration, because that means that they'll just be, this is even before Trump, they'd be frozen out and NBC and CBS would get that interview. So the level of soft peddling interviews that I see in the US, I find really problematic. And in fact, we've seen this with German reporters and British reporters who have come to the White House and asked Trump really difficult questions. So I do think there's so much to learn in the public broadcasting model that I think now we could take really important lessons from.
Thank you. There's another question over here.
Yeah, I'm just wondering how much all the effort that has been put this last decades on digitalization, on going all digital, because of course we want to embrace technology and we want to be modern, and we've been convinced that this is the future. And journalists have focused their attention on an audience that is online, and that may have lead to them missing a whole swath of the population that doesn't necessarily consume information online. And are we not like journalists maybe they have disconnected themselves from the reality, from people the most vulnerable, the one who are not online, who don't have smartphones, and who are maybe less privileged and educated. So how can we help journalists to reconnect with the field so that they can better serve them?
For who is question? Who want you to answer? Anybody?
I'll take that. I think that in the beginning, obviously, of digital, the concern of the digital divide and of redlining journalism was extreme, but I think that at least in Europe and the United States, digital and mobile are now nearly ubiquitous and will be ubiquitous, and so I don't think that it's an issue of medium. I would also argue that and I respect very few more than Claire Wardle, but we're going to disagree now, which is fine, because she already did it to me, that's fine, so I'll do it back. So this. Jay Rosen, who I've quoted twice now, I haven't quoted Clay Shirky yet, which is, I think, a law to do that. Jay Rosen says that our notions of objectivity in American journalism separated us from the public we served, and that we thought we were not just separate from them, but in some ways above them. That we can judge what's going on with you better than you can, and we'll tell you what you need to know, and that caused a problem. I went over a lot of lines in this American election, and I did it knowingly and on purpose. I did things that no journalist would do. I worked for the Hillary Clinton campaign as a volunteer. I went and registered voters in Pennsylvania every weekend. You could argue that I either knocked on too few or too many doors, because she lost. I gave money to the campaign, and that was very new to me in my entire career. I did predict that Trump was going to win because I heard voters in a way that I wouldn't have heard them in any other way. The way I heard them on television or in quotes in newspapers. I watched in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, where Bethlehem Steel and much of the labor movement in the United States started with 2 universities in that town. I stood in front of the library to register voters, and I saw Hillary, Hillary, Trump, 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 Hillary, Trump, Trump, Trump. And none of this bullshit about them being apologetic. They were enthusiastic. And I heard why. I was able to do that because I did put my heart on my sleeve, right? And did I violate plenty of canons? Yes, I did. But I also saw what it was like not to be represented in media. As an enthusiastic Hillary Clinton voter in a time when Hillary Clinton voters were all portrayed as unenthusiastic, as being forced to do it, I got some small glimmer of what it was like to be unrepresented in the media that I've worked my entire career in. I've not written about this yet, but in a very real sense, I believe that I regained my citizenship. I used to write about citizen journalists, and I think that it was bullshit. Now, how do you square that with what Claire is saying, which is absolutely right? In a world where you have a BBC and you have public service broadcasting and you have those standards, which works in the UK, and I don't think would ever work in the United States for a whole host of reasons, I understand well how you hold on to that dearly. But my real argument about the American media is that if I were an entrepreneur and an engineer seeing a problem and trying to solve that problem right now, I've written about this, I would make a huge investment in responsible, fact-based, conservative journalistic media that understands the worldview and the perspective of that world and can argue like the Telegraph against the Guardian, which we don't have. In the world of my parents, you have the New York Times, which is a liberal hotbed, and the only choice we gave people, we abandoned that half of America, and the only choice we gave them was Rupert Murdoch's Fox News and Breitbart and Drudge. And so we, in responsible journalistic media, did not recognize there is another worldview. It's not an objective worldview. It's a worldview that says that business is good and world trade, well, they used to think was good, and conservative values and other things. And I think we ill-served them terribly. So yes, I'm on a side, yeah, and I'm going to resist the tyranny of Donald Trump, yeah. But I firmly believe that I have no good way to listen to what is then the other side, and we need that and need that desperately.
Yeah, very quickly, if you haven't seen the piece that was done by the Berkman Center, where they basically mapped the ecosystem, they looked at like 22,000 sources around the election, big bubble in the middle, big bubble in the left, complete vacuum in the center right. And so Jeff's absolutely right, and I agree. In the UK, you're a Guardian journalist. You know where the Guardian journalist stands, and I think that's what's absent in the US, and we need to be much more thoughtful about that.
Thank you. So I think we got time for two more final questions. So it's you and first you and you, maybe you. Okay, but short questions, please.
Thanks. Hello. Hi, my name is Chris Theodore. I publish and own a magazine in California called The Reader, and it's mailed to 400,000 people in California. And somebody asked about what are some of the ways to support journalists and models that are working. One of them is employee-owned companies, and that is what our company is. And there's a way to also safeguard, and I wanted to say this publicly, the social impact of the company called B certification, and also a public benefit corporation, and yet it is also for profit. So there are new legal structures that can help bake the social impact into the DNA of the company. And there's more information. We have organized a March for Journalism, marchforjournalism.com. If you look at the movement section, you can learn more about that.
Maybe Frederick wants to respond on that, because we were part also of Crowd Reporter, who is also employee-owned.
There's a mic right there.
There's the mic right in front of you.
No, I can only agree, and I think it's really great that you bring that up, because that's exactly the kind of knowledge that we have to share. It's like I said, it's not sexy, but this is the kind of like regulatory details, just general information of what's possible in terms of regulation, and how does that impact the business, and what can we do to encourage more businesses like that, where the social impact is basically ingrained in the DNA of whatever you do. So yeah, thanks for that. I'm going to check out March for Journalism.
So I saw one final question, and of course you. I remember you, but first there was a lady over there, the red phone and the red hair.
Matching phone and hair. Hi, Julie Pizzetti from Australia, and Claire was recently with us. She was referring to this onslaught of interest in Trump in Australia, and it is true. It's a global phenomenon. So I come from a public broadcasting background at the ABC in Australia, and now work for Fairfax Media, and have been an academic in between and tussled with these very questions. I sit somewhere between Jeff and Claire. I'm
chair right here. Yeah.
I would happily take that chair right now, but I have to be brief. So I think one of the critical questions that we have to tussle with is how we empower the voices that have been marginalised, that have led to this revolutionary outcome. It's not just the US, look at Europe. Populism is clearly on the rise globally, absolutely the same in Australia. How do we answer the difficult questions, the uncomfortable questions that they want to put? There's sometimes questions that are offensive. And how do we give that the airtime or the space online or wherever to provide fact-based responses without that sense of alienation? The risk with the public broadcast model is, and I've seen this happen in Australia and elsewhere, is that what you end up with is a lurch to the far right, because you feel the need to provide balance. How do you balance, extremist views We don't seem to do that by bringing on extremely left views, for example. So I think we end up with a dodgy recalibration if we go down that path exclusively. So I think one of the really big challenges for academics, for journalists, for startups, human rights organisations, freedom of expression organisations, platforms, is to accommodate the questions that need to be asked, the challenging questions, and to answer them in a really informed way. And so that's what I'm looking for from the leadership.
Okay. Lena, you want to comment on that? You were talking about arrogance before, and
yeah, well, or just take this one. From the public broadcasters, the thing is, we have this discussion in Germany as well, as populism is rising up there as well, and we're always looking at this. I think the thing is, speaking of being arrogant and speaking also about other things like diversity in newsrooms, it's we have to bring in people from all genders, from all colors, from the spectrum of every part of the society, to really to mirror what is out there. And as you talked before about the liberal New York Times, a lot of media in Germany is liberal as well, and or on the more left side, and I think it's journalism just pulled the people who came in from just one side, and we had that over 30 years or so. And we have this discussion in the newsrooms, but we have this discussion on the political panels as well. And I think bringing more diversity into every part of this area could only help journalism at all, or in all.
so you're holding up that one brief question for you. Okay, so we're just in time. It was a long day. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, for coming us, and avoiding before everybody's heading now to Facebook. So we end up this session right now. Thanks, everybody. Thanks to our brilliant speakers, and I hope there's some contagion effect on the netzwende. Thank you.
To lead a way out of this is really the right group of people to ask. So lately I was looking beyond journalism for some inspiration, and I didn't have to look that far. Actually, I just had to look at my wife. She's an environmentalist, and I mean, environmentalism is also not the merriest industry at the moment. There are a lot of bad news there as well, but there's great hope and great progress. So this very moment, there is a radical transformation of the energy grid. The so-called smart grid is very much like the early version of the internet. It's a peer-to-peer platform. It allows access to everyone, small producers, a lot of renewables, and it's decentralized. That's a very radical transition going on right now. And how does that relate to the situation we are in right now? It's quite the exact opposite situation we are in right now, right? Like, we are experiencing how more and more power is concentrated in a few hands, namely Facebook and Google. But don't worry, I'm not going to start with a whole rant about the platforms and dependencies and all this stuff. I want to go back to the environmental movement, because I think there are some lessons to be learned for us journalists. And the first lesson, I think, is that we need a sustainability movement in journalism. Like, one of the first and most important victories of the environmental movement was that they forced us to make a distinction between dirty energy, like fossil fuels, and clean energy, renewables. And for some reason, I really wonder why that is, we don't really have that kind of discussion and this distinction when we talk about journalism. It's all kind of...
That seems to be gotten off track during the last couple of years. So what about this title, Netzwende, which means somehow in a way like something like net transition? It could be a motto or just a hashtag for today. It could so also be a Slack group to organize this discourse with you. It could be a movement, depending on you people, even an alliance among equal partners, of whom are many here today. But definitely it will be an award giving for the first time together with the Schwingenstein Foundation and VOCER, first time in November in Hamburg at VOCER Innovation Day. So it will be an award for sustainability in journalism. So maybe Trump is the best that could ever have happened to journalism, because he makes this transition necessary. Considering this potential, VOCER takes the opportunity of hosting this panel here tonight about the fallout of the US election, about fake news, hate speech, about the atomization of the public, media populism, maybe social bots, and some perspectives of organic journalism. So each speaker, to explain the format, has 5 minutes to enlighten you, the attendees, about his or her idea of the netzwende, the net transition, a fundamental change of the relevance, the production, the distribution, and the funding of journalistic content. So the goal of this session overall is to bring together forward thinkers like these 6 fine brains here on the panel in order to discuss creative ideas, obviously expecting that Donald Trump could win, even though the FBI was investigating Hillary Clinton. So everybody, first and foremost, my dearest friend Jeff Jarvis here, was then very, very, very disappointed as soon as he heard of the latest polls during election night. Do you remember the tweet you were posting at 4 or 5 a.m. in the morning on November 9th?
God hates us?
No. Fucking America. And that, I believe, was the feeling almost every journalist had in the country at this night, and I have to confess, not only in America. So since Trump had won his presidency, a lot of questions were risen. Such as, how could this have happened? What have we done wrong? What have we overseen in covering and explaining the election? And that's when we came up with the idea of post-Trump journalism discourse or conversation. And also the title of this panel is, of course, very provocative, but not only to fill up this room today. We'd rather like to think about Trump as a wake-up call for journalism, a worst-case scenario that could, in its badness, overall be useful for us to rethink journalism, to rethink how journalism is functioning, how news are distributed, how the profession is defined and maybe financed, and last not least, how people, quote Trump, in the fake news business could regain the trust of the people. Buddy, I would like to welcome you to our little panel here tonight. I'm Stefan Weichert from Hamburg Media School and co-founder of the non-profit think tank VOCER, who is hosting this panel tonight. So thanks for coming, y'all. I would like to start with a little game here. Who of you did not vote for Donald Trump? By citizenship or by heart? Okay. I don't see every hand here. What's wrong? Who expected Trump to be president, honestly? Really? Okay, you're good. Who had the feeling during the election that he or she, as a journalist, had something to do against Trump's ambitions getting president? Who had this feeling, his stomach feeling, bad stomach feeling? Okay, one honest person here at least. So who has this feeling now to do something against Trump? Okay, not so many, but I think that's the spirit. So to complete the game I want to ask one last question. Who thinks that Donald Trump is something good that is happening to journalism right now? In the end, okay, wow, good. So when I visited New York last October, together with my colleague from VOCER Live Crump here, I had visited and studied a lot of newsrooms during that time, and we realized that it was very easy to get into a conversation with journalists when we start to talk about Trump during this time, and it was the major phase of the election, as you might know, in October. But none of our interview partners was serious and stimuli how we can get journalism more sustainable in a sense of a driven aim of plurality, diversity, and, well, let us surprise ourselves. So again, each speaker has 5 minutes, and for his little wake-up call, and if the time is overdue, my colleague René here will make an awkward sound to remind the people that they are over the 5 minutes. So we're going to start with Frederick. Frederick is not only a colleague of mine from VOCER, he's also editor-in-chief of PICT, a curation platform, a German one, which just started an English version. With his statement, like maybe Trump is our Chernobyl or our Fukushima for journalism, he encouraged us to start the journalistic debate about netzwende. So he's a kind of initiator, originator. Today he will focus on the maybe wrong KPIs and their consequences, as well as inevitable dependencies and the question, what's the lesser evil? So you are welcome to give Frederick a huge applause.
I'm not sure this, it is on. Yeah, let me start with a confession. I am in a sort of hate-love relationship with the International Journalism Festival. I love Perugia, who doesn't? I love meeting all the new friends. I love going to the panels. But I hate being reminded every year that we're not really making huge progress. In fact, I have the feeling every year we're in a little bit worse situation than the year before. And I'm not so sure if actually looking for, quite like asking journalists